Welcome to Trapped Live with Bill Boggs. Today with our very special guest, the premier sportscaster of his generation, multi-Emmy winning Bob Costas. Trapped Live is brought to you by the certifiably funny new novel, The Adventures of Spike the Wonder Dog. Go to spikethewonderdog.com to visit or order Spike. I'm your announcer, engineer, director, and former man about town, Jeff Leibowitz. And now, here's your favorite talk show host to be trapped live with, Bill Boggs.
Thank you very much, Jeff. How are you doing? Big day today with Bob Costas. This is exciting
for me. Very exciting. And of course, it's been a big week. We had Father's Day and we had my wedding anniversary, so it was fun.
Yes, good for you. Well, let's get started. I want to include you in the show. I want to see just how many encomiums I can actually pile in one sentence. Bob Costas. There he is. Look at handsome Bob. Well, in truth, a man who is regarded at the top of his field in a highly competitive field. Here they come. He's erudite. He's accessible. He's insightful. He's entertaining. He's a true pro. And get this, he's a genuine good guy. Now, in addition to the encomiums, let's get to some of his accomplishments, okay? Right now, he's hosting Major League Baseball play-by-play, MLB, and has an interview show, Studio 42. But how about this? He's right up there with Cal Ripken on streaks, primetime host of 11 different Olympic Games, okay? It goes further. He's covered golf, boxing, hockey, basketball, football, NASCAR, horse racing. One of the best talk shows, in my opinion, in the history of television was later with Bob Costas with long-form interview. Serious point there. Most importantly, he has played himself on my favorite television show, Family Guy, in the Turban Cowboy.
Yeah.
Welcome, Bob Costas. Good to have you here, Bob.
Thank you, Bill. Although our paths have crossed since, this is the first time we've been on the air together in 20 years. As you may recall, in the year 2000, as Conan O'Brien sometimes says in one of his bits, in the year 2000, you and I went to the old county stadium in Milwaukee. Right. It was the last year of the ballpark before they moved into the new stadium. And you were hosting a program on the Food Channel, and you said, what do you want to do? And I could have picked a high-end restaurant of one kind or another, but I said, no, I'm a baseball guy. Come to Milwaukee, and I will treat you to the best ballpark food anywhere in the major leagues, the bratwurst with secret stadium sauce at County Stadium in Milwaukee. And we had a great time. It was a rain delay, but that only allowed us to eat more bratwurst. So it was good.
Yeah, we got to know each other that day. You know, it's so interesting because certain things actually survive forever. Jeff, let's go to a clip and recreate that moment right now.
Well,
20 years ago. Here we go. From Bill Boggs' Corner Table on the Food Network, Milwaukee County Stadium with Bob Costas.
No, Mr. Costas felt much more comfortable. Where else? In a ballpark. Well, Bob Costas, our Corner Table guests, have taken us to some of the finest restaurants in America.
And what that's are we doing the case here today.
What are we doing here in Milwaukee?
Well, I've been in virtually every ballpark in America, and I may not be the #1 expert to compare the finest cuisine in America or other parts of the globe. But if you want a comparison of ballpark cuisine, you've come to the right place.
Good.
And I'm about to tell you that the bratwurst with secret stadium sauce at Milwaukee's County Stadium is bar none the finest ballpark eating you'll find anywhere in America. Whatever's in second place is like second place to Secretariat in the Belmont. It's closer to 10th than it is to first. This is numero uno right here.
All right, so ordering, what do we want?
We want a brat with sauerkraut and plenty of secret stadium sauce.
All right, we can take care of that.
All right, thanks, Lucille.
So that's actually what it's called, secret stadium sauce.
Absolutely. She's dipped it in the secret stadium sauce.
Right.
Now she'll go to the sauerkraut. And then we can move over to the condiment stand and lather on some mustard if we'd like.
Milwaukee County Stadium, the parking lot, I understand, is the tailgate center of all of baseball. Are you now, or have you ever been, a card-carrying tailgater?
I've not been somebody who instigates it. You're not good. I don't have the recreational vehicle, but I've been known to drop in on the tailgaters.
Right now, before we start talking about sports and the pandemic, there's a couple of things. How are you and your family doing in this extremely difficult time for all of us?
You know, I've quoted this line a couple of other times. Right at the beginning, a friend of mine said a very insightful thing. He said, you know, we're fortunate. We just have to adjust. A lot of other people are going to have to figure out how to survive. So for us, it's been an adjustment. And professionally, because of Skype and Zoom and everything else, I've been able to go on the Major League Baseball Network a couple of dozen times, do some things with ESPN around The Last Dance, and that, you know, drew a lot of attention, and on CNN occasionally. So professionally, I'm fine. From here in Southern California, where we just happened to be when the lockdown happened. So instead of heading back to New York, we've just stayed here. We're well situated. The only drawback is this is the longest by far I've ever gone without seeing my kids. They're adults now, but, you know, they're still your kids. But, you know, with FaceTime, I'm in contact with them every day. But that's the one thing I long for, to actually be in their presence. There's no baseball to do, at least for the time being. I suppose we're going to start in about 3 weeks. We'll see what happens when that date arrives.
Well, let's get into it a little bit. First, I'm wondering just your overview, and it's all a matter of guesswork because we really don't know the forest fires of the pandemic. Your overview of sports. Let's start with baseball. It was a horribly contentious 3-month period. I, of course, had always hoped that Bob Costas would become the commissioner. We would not have these problems.
I don't need that kind of Soros bill.
I know that. Why these terrible problems between rich owners and rich players for fans who are deprived of a sport that's supposed to be the national pastime?
You know, it's in their history. I thought since they got through a number of contracts in this century, in the last 20 years or so, without a work stoppage, I thought that the relationship was better, but the owners had the upper hand in the last deal. And without getting too deeply into the weeds, they manipulated some of the provisions. There's a thing called service time. If you're around for 3 years, you're eligible for arbitration. Around for 6 years, you're eligible for free agency. And the players and their representatives felt that the owners were sometimes sending guys to the minors, bringing them back, so that they fell just short of that service time. So they kept them for 4 years instead of 3 before arbitration, that sort of thing. So that built up some resentment, and the history is there. And they both lost sight of where they fit into the big picture. Fans don't like this kind of public squabbling under the best of circumstances. But with a global pandemic, with economic distress, with unrest and a social issue of much greater importance being contested as we speak and talked about, something that goes back centuries and is much more important than baseball, as much as I love it. I think the resentment on the part of even the most diehard fans about how myopic they have been and short-sighted they have been is real. And that's even before we get into the coronavirus. Baseball, like every other sport, can try their best to have a million contingency plans, and they do, but it's a very tough needle to thread. So who's to say that once they start around July 20th, that they can make it all the way through to a World Series at the end of October? Fingers crossed, but not guaranteed.
Did you ever have, as a child, did you play ball? I know you love baseball, as I do. I still bleed Phillies red, and I was upset a couple of my Phillies players came down with the virus. So,
yes.
How about you? What were your fantasies as a child, and how much did you actually play?
I played constantly. I was, a New York street kid. Stickball, punch ball. You're by yourself. You're throwing a Pensy Pinky or a Spalding, as they called it in New York, one of those little pink rubber balls off a stoop, or a tennis ball, or you chalk a strike zone on a handball wall and play with one guy, one other guy, pitcher and a stickball bat. And of course in Little League. And I tried out for my high school team, and I really wasn't all that bad. I play along because, you stand alongside people that are in the Hall of Fame. And when I did basketball, I'm standing next to Shaquille O'Neal. It's a funny visual. So I play along that I was the kid who was, picking 4-leaf clovers in right field. But that really wasn't true. I was good enough to be the last guy cut by my high school baseball team. And the coach, Chuck Orant, rest his soul, had actually played minor league ball in the Pirates chain. And he was a prescient man. He said, Costas, You're not bad with the glove, but I don't think you can hit your weight, and I don't think you weigh 130, which might have been true when I was 16 years old. And this is what he said, I swear. He said, have you ever thought about broadcasting? I said, that's all I think about. He goes, good, try that because you can't help this team. And that's the way he cut me. And I got cut from the basketball team, too. I could shoot better than anybody on the team. It was just free throws. I'd be the best guy on the team. But I couldn't get my shot off, really. I couldn't really guard anybody. And the coach said, you know, I'd love to have you on the team, but we'd have to run a double or triple screen every time just to have you get your shot off. So that's the way he cut me. So I wasn't terrible, and I love to play, but here's the key. The whole time I was playing in the schoolyard, Mel Allen's voice was in my head, or Red Barber, or Marty Glickman, or the young Marv Albert, because that was the soundtrack of all those games. And I thought of myself more being upstairs in that booth with them than being down there on the field at Yankee Stadium. I was a reasonably realistic view of my own ability.
My situation is very similar to yours, Bob. Philadelphia street games, stickball. We played a half ball. When the ball would get split, we played a game called white ball. And in stickball, I think if I look at all the sports I played, I never really excelled. But in stickball, I was pretty good. I invented a pitch where you held your knuckles like this on the Spalding, and with an overhead move, it snapped your wrist, and the pitch came in and sunk. For 2 days, I was like Don Larson until all the kids I played against realized every time he throws that pitch, his arm comes down like this. And
so you're tipping the pitch.
They wouldn't swing at it, and I couldn't throw it any other way. But let's back to baseball, back to the pandemic. We're going to be seeing teams play, Bob, with empty stadiums. I took a picture out of the New York Times. Jeff, can you put this shot up? This is a German soccer team that has artificial there. That's the team. That's a real team there. And in the stands are packed with pictures of people. Do you think that we're going to get that ridiculous with any sport, but basketball or football or baseball, to put artificial people in the stands and artificial noise coming from them?
I hope not on the people. I could see, however, artificial crowd sound. They could at least fiddle with that. There's been some talk about that because it will sound eerie when someone hits a grand slam home run, makes a spectacular catch, and you hear nothing at all.
Yes, that's actually a good point. If it were accenting a true moment and not just, general background noise, a rumble here, a rumble there. All right, so let's move on to basketball. The situation is the players are going to be in a so-called bubble. About that.
Yeah, basketball and hockey are in a position much different from baseball or football. They just have to complete what they started. They can pick it up. Basketball plans to play a handful of regular season games. Hockey, I think, is going just straight into the playoffs. But essentially, they're getting to the playoffs as quickly as they can, and they can isolate in one place. Basketball in Orlando, at Disney World, the NHL in Las Vegas. That's all fine, except in Florida, as you know, the coronavirus is surging. And even though they plan to isolate, that's where you are. Yeah. So even as they plan to isolate the players and only the minimum number of essential personnel beyond the players, and they'll take over entire hotels, high-end hotels, no other people will be staying there. They'll take care of all that, but you're still going to have staff coming in and out unless, and I haven't heard this, unless they intend to quarantine the staff and pay them well enough to have it be worth their while to stay away from their own families. So they stay in the hotel too, and they get tested on a daily basis. The NBA has small rosters, the smallest rosters in all of the team sports that we follow. So if they take over an entire hotel and they quarantine the staff, the desk staff, the housekeepers, the room service people, everybody else, they quarantine the staff along with the players and test them as regularly as the players have been tested. It's still a tough needle to thread, but that gives them a chance. But I think if other people are coming in and out and aren't in the same bubble as the players, then that bubble's going to burst.
What about the human effect of the players? I mean, these guys they get revved up. They've gone to a game. They're used to going out, having a couple drinks, running around, chasing women. Now they're in a bubble. And it's basically is it going to be the honor system, or they're not literally allowed out the front door of the hotel?
Well, I don't think that you want to treat these players as if they're under constant surveillance, but I'm pretty sure there will be some security there.
Yeah.
There will be the minimum number of ways to get in and out, and there'll probably be somebody posted there saying, hey, Joe, where are you going and why? But the general point you bring up is important. We tend to forget that athletes peak at a time when most of us are just gaining our maturity or haven't gotten there yet. You're talking about athletically gifted, generally extremely attractive 24, 25, 26-year-old people. In this case, we're talking about testosterone-fueled males.
Yes.
They do what people in those circumstances do, and you can't blame them under most conditions. So that's going to take some adjusting to. And I think the message that the league has to sell to them is it isn't for all that long. We get this done. We don't have that many travel days. We're just trying to get to a championship and get it over with. And then you're on your own.
What do you think the effect is of having played? That's what I wanted to establish, that you know what it's like to be on the field and play.
Well, not at that level, though, Bill.
No,
I'm not going to kid
you know
anybody.
what it's like to be on the field and play. You know what it's like to feel the adrenaline of the game, the rush of the game. You know what it's like to be at the bat with a full count and everybody's waiting for you. What do you think the effect will be, Bob, of no fans, no screaming, no hollering, no adrenaline rush on top of your adrenaline rush? What do you think that might be? Just conjecture.
I think it's going to be eerie, and the players themselves don't know until they experience it how it will affect them. But my guess will be it would have a greater effect on constant action games like basketball than it would on baseball, where one guy's at the plate, and most of the time the other guys, they have to be poised and ready, but they're not in constant action. It's the pitcher, the catcher, and the batter. So it isn't a flow game and a momentum game in the same way that hockey and basketball are. So I would think that it's the latter two that would be more affected than baseball by the absence of any kind of energy from a crowd.
Now we're going to be we're returning to sports and all the attendant dangers. I mean, look what happened with Djokovic's little tennis tournament over there in Europe. Players getting sick. All those attendant dangers, but there's one essentially major change. And I've used this term of the tragic irony of Colin Kaepernick kneeling down during the national anthem and a police officer kneeling down for 8.5 minutes, killing a handcuffed man, and the subsequent anthem of this, there we have it, and the subsequent anthem of justice, of justice for minorities, justice for African Americans, and the call to action now maybe of African American players and many white players, as we've seen them rallying around in NASCAR. What do you think we're going to be seeing that it will be pretty much completely different with regard to the way that athletes are speaking out about racial injustice as we return to the season?
Well, the people who have wanted to keep a lid on that, the stick to sports or shut up and dribble crowd, their case is not very strong anymore. The force of events and the players' willingness to speak out, it's just too strong a force. That doesn't mean that you have to agree with every utterance that's offered by every athlete. Some people are going to be more nuanced, have a greater grasp of complexity, be more insightful and better informed. So you don't have to nod and assent to everything that's said, but the general idea that this is an inflection point, that we're not going to put up with this anymore. And by we, obviously at the center of it are African Americans most directly affected, but this obviously also now includes millions upon millions of people of all backgrounds worldwide, not just in the United States. So as a matter of justice, as a matter of fairness, as a matter of morality, and as a matter of the nation, as Martin Luther King said all those many years ago, living up to the meaning of its creed. That was my favorite line from his March on Washington, I Have a Dream address. Other lines are quoted more often, but he called upon the nation to rise up and live out the meaning of its creed. That, I'm not a political philosopher, but I'll offer this. That, I think, has always been the saving grace of America, that we have not always lived up to our ideals. but those ideals are part of our founding. And so the aggrieved can appeal to those ideals. You can't do that in every other nation. You may have a grievance, but you don't have a framework from which to reform it based on the founding ideals of the country. And now I think that people are rightfully demanding that those ideals be more nearly perfect. It's never going to be utopia because we're human beings. There's going to be imperfections, but we can move closer to perfection than we presently are.
Wonderfully put. Wonderfully put. I wanted to move on to kind of a fantasy question for all three of us. For you, I will chime in with mine and Jeff. If you could, and if you want a moment, we can go with Jeff first. But if you could re-attend any sporting event you've ever attended in your life, re-attend it and re-experience it, what might that event be? That afternoon, that evening?
Re-attend it as a broadcaster or just as a fan?
Well, Jeff and I are talking about as fans, but you come from a dual perspective, so I'll give you an option there.
I'll give you one as a fan.
Okay.
The first baseball game that I remember, my dad took me to one game at Ebbets Field and one game at the Polo Grounds in 1957, the last year of the Giants and Dodgers in New York, and all I remember is the atmosphere. I don't remember any particulars. The first game I really remember was at Yankee Stadium in 1959. I was 7 years old. My dad took me to the game, and then you could leave the ballpark by way of the field. They'd open up the gates, and you could walk around the warning track, and Yankee Stadium then was so big and so imposing, the triple deck with the wedding cake effect and the lattice work of the facade and the huge dimensions, more than 460 feet to center field, and the monuments were on the field then because no one hit a ball out that far, and the flagpole was on the field. And my dad walked me around, and you're with your dad. And I remember he was wearing a yellow polo shirt, and he smelled like almost every dad then smelled, like Old Spice. They all wore Old Spice, which is making a comeback now. It's cool again. So he smelled like Old Spice. And we got around to the monuments in center field. And what would a 7-year-old think? Here's a monument to Babe Ruth, to Lou Gehrig. I thought they were buried there. Wouldn't you have thought that, Bill? I thought they were buried there. And I thought, well, wait a minute. When Mickey Mantle dies, they're going to bury him there too. And I started to cry.
Aww.
And my father's trying to assure me that, they're dead, yes, but they're someplace else. And Mickey Mantle's going to live a whole long time. He'll be fine. And then he sort of picked me up and put me on his shoulders and making me giggle, and I'm bouncing along and I'm looking around Yankee Stadium, and it's so breathtaking. If I could go back and relive that, that would also mean that my dad was alive, and I don't want to get too corny, but he died when he was only 42 years old and I was 18. So he never saw a single thing that I ever did. And I could have treated him to a lot of experiences that he otherwise would not have had. He could have been at the Olympics. He could have been at the World Series and the NBA Finals. And I never got to experience that with him. So being able to experience something with my dad again is what I would choose.
Well put. That's really well put. Just a quick follow-up. When you mentioned the Olympics, I never could figure out how you could be so completely prepared for everything you were talking about. It was track and field or air pistol. You always had, I know you have the thing in your ear. Did you prepare for a year before the Olympics and memorize this stuff?
This is a really good question. Before the first couple that I did in Seoul in 1988, and then the first one I did as the primetime host in Barcelona in 92, I did prepare for like a year. I crammed like somebody taking their final exam. And then, with the help and guidance of Jim McKay, the gold standard for all those years at ABC, and such a wonderful and generous man, he said, look, your job is to be the best generalist you can possibly be. You need to know the history of the Olympics. You need to know the big, broad storylines. You need to be able to react if something outside the Olympics happens, as he did so masterfully in Munich in 1972. But you don't need to know every platform diver from Peru or every long-distance skier from the Netherlands. That's for the experts at the venue. You're the big picture guy. And once that burden was lifted, I still studied hard, but not obsessively.
All right, let me go quickly to Jeff. If you could re-experience any sporting event you saw live, what would it be, Jeff?
Well, it's funny. I had told you before the show that I had already picked it, and it's very similar to Bob's, though not nearly as poetic. I was 8 years old, and my parents allowed our neighbor to take me and his son out of school and bring us to the Polo Grounds to see the Mets.
Oh, wow.
And A, I got to get out of school. That was a big deal back then.
Yeah.
And B, the entire environment of the Polo Grounds and every person there and all of the parents with their kids and all of the adults and all of the food really made an impression on me. And for a lot of reasons, very similar to Bob's, I'd love to go back there a long time ago.
You know, I was going to talk about Muhammad Ali and Ernie Shavers and watching that fight ringside at Madison Square Garden, but I'll go with my father. I'll go to Shad Park in Philadelphia, the Philadelphia Athletics playing the Boston Red Sox, Ted Williams, right field, and my father saying, "Watch that guy, watch that. That's Ted Williams. He's a great player." I was very young at the time. Well, this is great. Why don't we take I did have one other question. Could you we just had a very interesting visitor here in West Palm Beach, and it was the baby Trump balloon, which is like a blimp. Just put that up. Have you seen this, Bob?
I don't think so.
Yeah, no, I thought it was in London.
I have seen that. I didn't realize that it was in West Palm Beach.
It's like hovering over Mar-a-Lago for a while. So it actually leads me to a sports question. And the question is, what happened to the Goodyear blimp?
Yeah.
Where is it?
It used to be a staple. It used to be a staple. And I always wondered, you'd be doing a series. Let's say it's the Dodgers against the Yankees. And I figured out that they must have multiple blimps because moving at 3 to 5 miles an hour, the dirigible was not going to be able to make it from New York to LA between games 2 and 3, even with an off day. I remember mentioning to Yuko, Yuke, is the blimp going to follow us out to LA?
Listen, we're going to take a break. One thing I want to say, I loved your appearance, like in the last 2 years, with Bill Maher. Bill Maher.
Thank you.
We don't miss that show. You were terrific on that show.
Thank
you.
All
right, let's take, our show is sponsored by my book. We'll come back. We're going to turn the tables. So let's take a quick break.
This book right here?
Yes.
According to Linda Stasi, New York Daily News columnist, TV commentator, and best-selling author of The Sixth Station and Book of Judas, the adventures of Spike the Wonder Dog has another big adventure awaiting, climbing to the heights of the bestseller lists. Spike tells us the story of how he and his master Bud go from Spike's first appearance on local High Point, North Carolina daytime TV to a big deal appearance on late night TV to big-time New York TV. Spike will keep you laughing and on the edge of your seat at the same time. Filled with real-life celebs, lots of inside TV info, and crazy adventures, this one is made for the big screen. How do you say bravo in dog? Well, fans, that concludes the top of the first of today's show. As we enter the bottom of the inning, stepping up to the plate to now interview Bill Boggs about his soon-to-be legendary new book, The Adventures of Spike the Wonder Dog, is a true Hall of Famer, inducted into the Sports Broadcasting Hall of Fame in 2018, the already legendary Bob Costas.
Thank you,
Jeff. Thank you. Thank you for that very kind introduction. Bill, I have read this from cover to cover, and I've actually made some notes. And the first thing is this, just the pattern here. Spike is a very Runyon-esque dog. Some of these phrases are reminiscent of Raymond Chandler in, Farewell, My Lovely, the old Philip Marlowe detective novels and film noir type stuff. It was Chandler who had one of the greatest lines ever, which was, it was a blonde that could make a bishop kick a hole in a stained glass window. Unfold those shapely stems of yours, baby, and take a memo on this caper. So that Spike likes the nightlife. He likes the clubs, right? He likes the dames. or in this case, the female dogs, use your own expression for that. He likes boxing. He likes the horses, right? He likes the street life. That's Spike.
It's true. The book is narrated. It's in the dog's voice. And what really happened was, you've written several books. I don't know if you've ever written fiction. This is my second novel. The character of Spike came through when I first started, the very first day. I knew I was going to be writing a book about a dog who became a big TV star with his master, to follow certain things that happened in my career. But it was when I sat down to write it and the voice of my central character came through me that I felt I was experiencing something I really had not ever experienced quite before in my life. And it led me on a journey for 2 years of writing the book.
Well, this really is a delightful, and as they say, although I'm not one of the people who blurbed it, many fine people did, including one of my favorites, Alan Zweibel. Let me see what Alan said. This is so great. So smart, witty, and inventive that I had to keep reminding myself that I didn't write it, says Alan Zweibel, who was one of the original writers on Saturday Night Live and still works, with Martin Short and Billy Crystal and all the big heavyweights of comedy. It really is, especially in times like this, a lot of what we're reading and paying attention to is pretty heavy. You want to get away from that for a weekend? This is the ticket right here.
That's what I've been trying to push. I had no idea, what I knew I'd be promoting my book, and it's a very difficult time in the pandemic. 2 weeks ago, the New York Times actually said any writer, well, short of, major league writers, releasing a book now is facing insurmountable odds. So, because Spike and I prefer to mount those odds. So, but I had no idea, Bob, that I would be, when I was talking about the book, saying, yes, laughter can be the best medicine, short of a vaccine. I'm curious about what you thought of the Donna Hanover character, not the Donna Hanover who was married to Rudy Giuliani, who got fired from her sideline reporter job because she kept making mistakes. He called a field goal a punt, and her constant retraining. Did that have any impact on you or remind you of any one, male or female, you might have been working with?
Yeah, I'm not going to call anyone out. Everyone I've worked with has been at least basically competent, some better than others. You can't escape. The character's name is Donna Hanover, and especially a New York-centric audience is going to associate that with the former Mrs. Rudy Giuliani. But I noticed that you and Spike used this opportunity to take a few swipes at people in the television and movie business. And Spike is a name-dropping dog. This is a partial list. Bill Maher, Tucker Carlson, Scott Pelley, Ellen DeGeneres, Judge Judy, Jerry Springer, Maury Povich, Steve Harvey, Whoopi Goldberg, Walter Cronkite, Roberto Duran, Michael Douglas, Robert Klein, Gilbert Gottfried, Larry David, Anna Nicole Smith, Chris Christopherson, Conan O'Brien, NWA, Judy Garland, Christiane Amanpour, Jerry Falwell, Bruce Willis, and I barely scratched the surface.
Well, this is the life we live. These people pass through our lives. That's interesting that you mentioned all those people. But all the characters you talked about, I thought would be interesting. It wasn't an intention, like to write a book, Bob, with a lot of name dropping in it or anything like that. It just sort of passed through. I mean, I like the scene with Spike and Bill Maher are out there on the veranda at Joy Behar's party, and Bill Maher's lighting one up, and he's looking at the sky, and he says, "Full moon, Spike. Weird things are going to happen." And Spike says, "Yeah." And then Spike says, "Yeah." And it turns out a week later they were painting me green, which is a whole other chapter of the book.
Well, here's a question I have,
Yes.
and I'm wondering if this is a bit like the great Robert Smigel with Triumph the Insult Comic Dog, or mascots at ball games, or the puppet on the ventriloquist's knee. Those figures, those fictional figures, can get away with saying things that you can't. So this liberated you, right?
Well, that is a very good question. Like, even go back just briefly on the Scott Pelley thing, that's not something I would have said, but in Spike's world, that could exist. So the closest thing that I could say about writing The Adventures of Spike the Wonder Dog was it was as if I became a ventriloquist. Penn and Teller said I could get on stage and start telling you what I really think about you and things and this and stuff like that, and people would walk out because they'd get pissed off at me. But if I have a dummy there and the dummy is saying it, they'll accept a lot of different things. That's true. That is what it was like. It's difficult to fully explain. You know, I had a dog who was Spike, who got killed right before I came to New York. He'd run over by a drunk driver right in front of me. And so the initial idea for the book was, what would happen? Yeah, there's the original Spike right there. What would happen if Spike hadn't gotten killed and had come to me with New York in today's world and became a big TV star? This dog was a hysterical dog. He got 3 times, even though it was like Chris Rock in a dog suit. This dog was really funny. And somehow the imagined voice of the dog transmuted itself onto the page.
Well, to good effect, really. The dog's got an attitude. I like the dog's patter. I like the dog's flow. And I do think in reading this that it was liberating for you, because he could say things, Spike could say things that were rattling around in your head that you would never say in your own voice.
Well, not even that. More things I wouldn't even think. When I somehow giving yourself the permission to write a satire, which the book is, to write a comic novel, to take big aims at big targets in our society, at what I call the Kardashian era of our culture, with the culture in quotes. And I'm an observer. I can, like, at least once a month, I like to go off by myself for a couple of hours and just sit like a high top in a place and just watch people. And all these years of just observing have led to something. I wouldn't say I have tremendous powers of observation, but I do like what you said about the noir aspect of the book. At time to time, it got like that, and I'm grateful. First, if Scott Pelley's watching, I apologize. I'm grateful. I do. It was meant in fun, but something about that question got me. Anyway, I really appreciate you reading the book, Bob.
I got a real kick out of it, and I recognized, you and I are probably alike in some respects. The sort of movies we watch, the TV shows we marinated in, being roughly from the same generation, the kind of streetwise columnists we read in newspapers, you in Philadelphia, me in New York, back when a tabloid newspaper meant something different than it means now. It didn't mean trash and gossip and celebrity stuff. There was always a little of that. But what it meant was a more two-fisted sort of for the people thing that you'd find in the New York Times or in the Washington Post. You could read both, but there were different voices. And the tabloid often had more of the voice of the people aspect to it. And that's how my dad's friends talk. That's how people at the ballpark talk.
Yeah, I can't speak in Spike. I couldn't get on a stage and start pretending I was a dog. If I had the puppet, if I had a puppet, I could probably do it. One thing I want to tell you, just you quickly as a sportscaster, one question for you, and then we'll wrap it up. Are you aware probably of how much a hero you have been to children in your life? Is that an awareness you have?
Here's what I'm aware of, that sports, despite all the nonsense that sometimes surrounds it and the overemphasis and everything else, sports cuts through. At its best, it cuts through. It brings together people who otherwise wouldn't have that much in common. And the late, great David Halberstam, Pulitzer Prize winner, historian, but huge sports fan, so wrote a lot of books devoted to sports. And he put this very well. He wrote a book called Summer of '49 about the great pennant race between the Yankees and Red Sox. And he said, I'm 10, 11 years old, whatever it is. And at the dinner table, I can't debate the Marshall Plan with my uncles or with my dad, but my opinion about DiMaggio and Williams counted just as much. And for kids, that connects them both to childhood and to a portion of the adult world. And when you see what athletes can do, the way kids light up when they see sports figures, and it's not just athletes, could be a broadcaster or someone that they associate with bringing them that kind of joy. It's something you should never take for granted. We may not deserve it, but it's a blessing that comes along with it, that you can brighten people's day. You know, whenever I'm asked to do, and this doesn't make me special, lots of people do it. If I'm asked to do a Make-A-Wish thing or something that involves kids, I recognize the power of sports and the power of television in this case. And I consider it a real blessing to be able to do that.
Well, I'll tell you why I asked that question, Bob Costas, was this morning when I was swimming, getting my exercise, I remembered that I wrote in Philadelphia, we had Bill Campbell, Vi Som, and Claude Heron in my youth, those three. And I wanted to be a sportscaster when I was very little, 7 or 8 years old. I wrote to one of them, and he wrote me back. And I remember when I got this, it was probably the first time, other than meeting Roy Rogers when I was 5 years old.
Wow.
Oh, well, that's a wonderful one. I got this card in my hand, and it was like, wow, he wrote me, you know. And every once in a while, I'd write him, and he'd write me back. And then years later, in my teen years, I really liked Marilyn Monroe, and I wrote her. And she never wrote me back. I never heard from Marilyn. I waited. It just went, and that was that. I never heard from her.
You know, she might have had other demands on her time, Bill.
You know, people, all the stuff I've been doing, promoting the book, I've done about 3 of those things where they give you 10 questions. Who your favorite? My stuff is all pop culture stuff. You know, some people, I want to have dinner with Shakespeare and Winston Churchill. No, but if you could spend one afternoon with somebody, who would you like that to be? I thought Marilyn Monroe. I'd like to spend an afternoon with Marilyn Monroe. By the way, the Wonder Dog thanks you. Spike the Wonder Dog thanks you.
And an excellent likeness here. I don't know if hold on, so it's no glare. An excellent likeness here on the front of the book. I have to get this line in before we leave. One of my favorite lines, because you're Bud. Bud is obviously you in the book, Spike's master, but you have to wonder who's really in control here, Spike or Bud. But he says of Bud's girlfriend, Rhonda, she was working her way through rabbinical school as an aerial dancer at the Taboo Strip Club or the Taboo Gentlemen's Club.
Yeah, Bud, the Spike's owner and dear friend, the talk show has a succession of women who are drawn to both higher education and working in the exotic services industry is the term that we use. You nailed that one. Yeah, Jane didn't want me to use that. She thought it was anti-Semitic. I said, come on. No, she still doesn't like it. I don't think. Like it. All right, Bob. Let's see, you're on the West Coast in an undisclosed location. It's 5 o'clock. What's the Costas evening going to be?
Well, you know, it's just me and my wife, Jill, and luckily we get along because we're going on 100 days in isolation. So we get along fine, and we'll have dinner, maybe a glass of wine. And one of the blessings of being on the West Coast, this is especially good when sports is underway, because you can watch a whole game and still be in bed at a reasonable hour. Or during football season, you could watch a doubleheader and still go out and play 9 holes of golf on a Sunday. So all the CNN stuff and the wrap-up shows, they're all over with by a reasonable hour. So I tend to be on a different cycle. I get up early in the morning here. I go to bed before midnight, which I never do when I'm on the East Coast. I'm a night owl. I'm up till 2 or 3 in the morning usually. So it's nothing terribly exciting. You say you swim every day. I'm looking out the window. I could dive right in the pool right now if I wanted to. It's
good, right? It's my father was an actual swimming coach. My father was an athlete, and then when my sister and I were born, he was working at the University of Pennsylvania as a swimming coach. He needed a job where he would make more money, but he was real. My father really taught me to swim, and swimming is probably the best all-around full body exercise. It's not like weightlifting, everything, but as a full body exercise, swimming is very good.
Yep.
Costas, what a pleasure.
Oh, thanks, Bill.
No, thank you very much, Bob. And get out to the West Coast. We'll take you out to dinner sometime. Get down there to your undisclosed location. Thank you very much. Any final words on the Adventures of Spike the Wonder Dog?
I loved it. I highly recommend it. I'm not one of the people who blurbed it because I got to it too late, but I would have offered a pithy blurb if asked.
Wonderful evening. good luck, good health, and under no circumstances let your guard down. Keep your guard up at all times. It's a tough time.
Thank you, Bill. Thank you, Lady Jane. Thank you, Jeff.
Thank you, Bob.
All right. See ya.
Let's hear a word from somebody who did blurb it. Leslie Bennett's, author of Last Girl Before Freeway, The Life, Loves, Losses, and Liberation of Joan Rivers, warns us that, like Joan Rivers, the adventures of Spike the Wonder Dog is definitely not safe for snowflakes. But fans of transgressive humor, like Family Guy or Dave Chappelle, will appreciate Spike's wild tales, which are raunchy, hilarious, and spectacularly politically incorrect. Bill Boggs has the manners of a gentleman, as does Spike, so they'll both understand if you take offense. Rivers would have just told you to go fuck yourself. Bill, as always, a pleasure.
Jeff, you're wonderful. Thank you. You're Ed McMahon. You're one of the best directors in the business, an engineer, a good friend. And how did you enjoy Mr. Costas tonight?
He was wonderful. He's always been wonderful. And his wife is equally wonderful. Unfortunately, she couldn't join us, I guess.
All right, folks, good night. And thank you, everybody. Thanks for watching.
Good night, all.